Well, so this is part two of some of my story and some of my song. Well, you get here, little baby and everything. Um, it's it's quite something. I mean, you're here. There are big people around. Can't see much. Not really aware of yourself. You don't remember mostly. Most of us don't remember until we're, I don't know. What do I remember? I remember I have a funny memory about when I was, I don't think I was born yet. I'm not sure how true it is. There's something there. Mother said somebody tried to slip in the window where she was staying and she got frightened and scared them off or something. I think I remembered that. I'm not sure. This is a silly thing. Let's forget that. So, I was born in kind of dramatic circumstances. The war with the World War had commenced the year before, about 9 months or so before I was born, and my parents were both from Oklahoma, and they were both. They met when they were studying at the University of Oklahoma. Two pretty different strains of people. My father's side is quite colorful, and I know quite a bit about it because my dad was always looking into our ancestry and where we came from and everything else. And so far as I can determine, we were basically French people. We had been kind of moving around. There had been a lot of wars and stuff going on between France and Germany, our, traditional enemy. And somehow or another, we had gotten, at some point in the Napoleonic Wars or something, we had gotten up to, some of our ancestors died in those wars. At least one of them, my son tells me. And anyway, we had gotten up into Bavaria. But then I had a very fortunate thing that I had a cousin I didn't even know existed in Oklahoma. About 20 years ago, I wrote a book to my own home, and he did all the research. He wrote this kind of historical fiction, but it was mostly true, but kind of added in a few things for color, conversations and stuff. Anyway, the way the story goes, we were up in Bavaria, and things were tough up there work-wise. They were French people, they were working in Bavaria. And living in Bavaria, and they were working 12 hours a day. 14. They weren't making much money. Their life was hard, so they decided to immigrate to the United States, and they did. So they immigrated over here around 1850. This story, as my son tells me recently, where we had people coming over as early as 1814. Somebody came over, but anyway, basically we came over in 1850. I assume in search of a better life. So that imprint of being in search of a better life was very strong in the ancestral feeling. So as a result, just for instance, skipping ahead to me, I've always had this very strong feeling that I wanted to find a better life. course, then at a certain point, it doesn't make any sense. What the heck are you talking about, a better life? I mean, it's a concept, isn't it? Find a better life. But anyway, so that's what the funny part about it is after about, 50 years, I realized, well, gosh, I've been here all this time in America searching for a better life, and I never found it. I did and I didn't, but basically, it's like something like a dream, like you can't find it. I want a better life. What do you mean? So the kind of ancestry that I identified with French had to do with their taste, because I was raised up, I had a pretty fine taste. Colors and paintings and china, all kinds of things. I had a pretty developed sense of taste. In other words, I found some fine things and inspired things to be quite beautiful, and others to be coarse and crude, and identified that part of the French sort of legend of the French. I didn't identify with much else. Anyway, so those people, they came to Missouri, a hardy group, a bunch of them. My great-great-great-grandfather, whatever it was a carpenter. Had a big family, and he married a saint. I don't say that lightly. He married a woman who, because they all got together and they were part of the Sooner rush, the land rush to Oklahoma. When they got themselves, they rushed over there. They stood on the border wherever it was. They got themselves a couple of farms or so. They got one for 160 acres, I know of, in Bonita, Oklahoma. I think that's how that worked. And he had a big thing going on. He was a carpenter, and he also sold white mules, of all things. I didn't even know they existed until I read about it in the book. But his wife was always going around with, being around the Indians. She was a midwife, I think, and she healed people and stuff, and had a relationship with the Indians. Obviously has spiritual side to her, and she was tuned in and wasn't just an ordinary, working farmer woman. She had something else going on. Interesting family. They had a whole bunch of kids, and then I think they had kids, and then my dad came along somewhere in there, and then I was born. So, coming back to the University of Oklahoma before the war, that was my dad's thing, farmers, French farmers. On my mother's side, as far as I can tell, Welsh. There were Welsh people from England. My mother was quite a good-looking woman. She had a nice figure and a blonde hair and blue eyes. I don't know where she got those from. Welsh, Scottish, English people. And my dad, being the French person he was, I guess he fell head over heels in love with her. He was studying geology, of all things. He was going to be a geologist. Well, about the sophomore year in college, FDR was president, and lo and behold, the Japanese got some crazy ideas about stuff they were going to do for stupid reasons, and they started a world war, and joined up with the They were, you know, on the dark side. Hitler. Well, Hitler was an interesting person. It was an interesting business. The Germans, at the time, I've learned, were considered in Europe to be just the most civilized people, the most advanced in terms of being civilized. They had wonderful composers, you know, I don't know about artists, but their music was really something. They were very much into art and culture, and yet they spawned this madman. How does it all work? How can a culture like that spawn a madman? Well, I know some of the reasons how that can happen, but it's somewhat interesting because this guy reminds me of when I was working. I got fortunate, I got lucky, and I got a job working for Barbara Streisand, my senior carpenter in our group. Was very talented at, he did this bizarre thing. He would take old wood, you know, stressed wood from old houses and things, and he would burn it with a propane torch, and then we would take a drill with a rotating sander on a very fast speed, 700, 800 RPMs, pretty fast speed. And once we burned it, why we would brush out all that stuff that was burning. But so take the piece of just an ordinary piece of living wood, and it would show all the grains. It would really enhance the wood. And then so he liked to do natural wood paneling and kind of stuff like that. And he was pretty good at designing things. So he could take an ordinary house and turn it into kind of like a little fairyland, a little, you know, look completely different with all the, you know, he'd panel the doors and everything else, and the place would just take on this whole wood thing. And so John Peters, who was Barbara's lover, he was quite a character, and the reason I'm telling this story is because of John. So John relates to Hitler. So anyway, Barbara had a place up north of Malibu Colony. It was called, it was a place called Paradise Cove. It was kind of a hidden, I mean, so some, of course, a lot of people up there knew about it, but I mean, basically it's kind of hidden. You drive along, you have to be this sign. Let's say you go off the road and then under a tunnel, under the road, and you'd come out on the other side toward the beach. And there was a little community down there, Paradise Cove. And John had bought a one of those, you know, it's kind of an ordinary tract type 2-story place. Ranch style, had a bit of property on it, maybe a couple of acres or so, or an acre, I don't know. Anyway, so somehow or another he found my lead carpenter. The guy's name was Nardine Young. Nardine was a kind of a smaller, wiry sort of guy, very chipper, very cheery, wiry, a good carpenter, and he, but also an artist of sorts. And so he, I mean, he had that knack for transforming places. And so John he wanted to hire him, pay him some pretty good money. Good money at the time, pretty good money. And I being his assistant, I was making pretty good money too. I was making more than my middle class establishment friends were making. Working for Barbara Streisand out there. We'd have to drive out there every day. It was a long drive from LA. Tough. And it got pretty hot out there too. But anyway, we were transforming this house. And it's funny because he paid us a lot of money, but the thing was, even though he paid us a lot of money, the house became much more valuable, so it was worth quite a bit more than what he paid us. So he was money making money. And we transformed that place. It was like pretty magic. Barbara really liked it. French doors in the patio we put in, and lofts, and all kind of transformative type stuff. So it didn't look like a ranch house. It didn't look like a tract home anymore. It looked completely different. And I had a crush on Barbara. She had a big soul. You could feel her soul. They drive up one of those, I don't know what they had. It was a Rolls Royce or a Mercedes or something, some high-end car. Every now and then she'd come out and visit. She was so quiet. Presence. I talked to her once. I think it was only the one time I ever really talked to her. She'd come in and we were working in some room, and there was a bathroom, and she was interested to know what was going on in that bathroom. We were doing the bathroom as well. So I remember being in there. I was working. She's standing there, and I sensed her presence. There was a kind of warmth there. I'm not sure if that was a good thing or not. Anyway, her presence was kind of warm. She's nice. I had a big crush on her. I didn't look at her hardly much. And, didn't let on. Being the idiot that I was, I probably should have, I don't know. But anyway, she was busy with John. But John was a real jerk. John Peters, he was. The guy had no qualms. He was always being a jerk with people, yelling at them. Had no hesitation to be, unpleasant or... I mean, he was a younger guy. He wasn't all grim and everything. But he'd say, get over there and here's what I want you to do. Do this and do this. And I don't know, I can't remember how he talked. One day, John, they had a guest house there. We were doing the guest house. When in the guest house, they had a floor that we were replacing the floor and putting in, real wood flooring and stuff. Real, wood with real character. And we were using this great big industrial brush sander. This thing must have weighed 20, 25. I don't know, it weighed a lot. And it was a very high torque thing, 3,000, 5,000 RPM, I forget. Very high torque. And you set that thing down on that wood and it would just clean off all the stuff off of it. All the old patina coverings and everything else. So one day, Mr. Obnoxious John, he was like, God, you didn't want to be around the guy very much. He's just a loudmouth, smart-ass loudmouth. But that's how he got her, because he had no qualms. Other people would be all hesitant and do other stuff, but he was all like, hey, blah, blah, we're doing this now. And I can't imitate him. Not at all. But anyway, so we're in there. John had a couple of kids, and I think Barbara had... Did she have some children? I think she might have had a couple kids. Not sure. Anyway, we didn't see much of Barbara. Barbara was busy, but every now and then she'd come out and look at the place, how we were doing. They'd stay out there. But John was mouthing off about something or another, and being inappropriate and out of place as usual. his employers can often be, well, how come you're doing that? Why don't you do it like this? Or, that kind of smart ass type of thing that, workers don't really much care for. And so Nardine had that, he had that big sander. Now, I can tell you, because I worked along with Nardine, we took turns doing it. And that sander, you had to set your feet on the ground pretty good. You had to keep your balance pretty good. You had to get that sander just right. And if you got it just wrong, it would kick off the floor. And if you weren't careful, it would throw you off balance. You'd fall down. So, you had to really be paying attention using it. And so, Nardine, he was a descendant of Brigham Young. Nardine Young was his name. He was a descendant of the Mormon guy, Brigham Young, an actual direct descendant. Anyway, so he turns to John. He says, John was a famous guy. I think he wrote the movie Shampoo or something, or he was a star in that movie. He's a pretty well-known Hollywood guy at the time. That was in the 70s, I think. Yeah, it had to be in the 70s. Anyway, so he turns to John. He's holding this thing. We're sweating. It's hot. John comes tripping in there, saying all these things. It was a work scene. He shouldn't have been disturbing it. But there he was. And so Nardine turns to him and he goes, here, John, here, try this. See what you can do with this. So you just handed him this big industrial brush sander. And John was up for it, so he turned it on. I think as soon as you turn it on, it would torque. It'd go like, whoa, like that. It was so strong. You had to turn it back. And he got down there and tried his hand doing it. And of course, he could hardly do it. But yeah, it did something to him, and he kind of got more respect for us all of a sudden. Because when you're a professional, I never said I was a professional carpenter. I'm a semi-professional. I'm almost professional. He makes some pretty good stuff. Oh, he made this table. Let's see. Can I show you the table? Yeah, you can see that table over there. I made that table the other day. It's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool table. Oh, I don't know. It's just a round table. Anyway, that's the kind of stuff I do. Anyway, it did something to him. And then, so, he sat down there on some kind of a piece of wood or something that was an overhang or something. And he started talking to us. And he dropped his whole facade. And underneath that facade, that jerky facade that he had, the guy was a real, there was this regular, normal guy. He had a couple of kids. He talked about his kids and his normal concerns about kids and everything else, and how him and Barbara were raising those kids up and so on. It's funny. But, of course, I was around there. I worked there for about a year, I think. Quite a long time, maybe 9 months, maybe a year, I'm not sure. And so, I kind of kept my eye on it. Well, you couldn't help avoid they couldn't avoid the guy. He was always doing stuff. We were poor, we were working hard, and we needed a paycheck on Friday. He'd come in and he'd go like, because they had all the money. They had money, big money, and big fancy, they had their, not Lamborghinis, but, you'd have some Jaguar thing, sports car, whatever it was. Oh, he says, gosh, I left my money in my other car. We didn't have another car. We had one car. One little 4x4 type truck. And I had 6 kids. At the time I had 5 kids, I think. 5, 6, probably 6. we needed that money for grocery food that weekend. You know, he's going like, oh, yeah, I won't be able to get it to you until next Tuesday. He's always pulling stuff like that. That was our job. Oh, I left my money in the other car. So sorry. Left my money in the Lamborghini. Characters. But John reminds me of Hitler. You know, nobody could get close to Barbra Streisand, but he did. He wormed his way in there. He was so brash. He's so forward. He went in there and just took what he wanted, you know. And she went for it. They were together for years. Jesus. Then a place up in Laurel Canyon. Did I get over there to work? I think maybe once or twice. I didn't do much over there, if I did anything at all. They had another house for the mist of time. That was in the 70s. That was 50 years ago. I don't remember. Anyway, Hitler was like that. He was all brash and, hey, you know, we're going to do this stuff, and just saying all kinds of things that normal people wouldn't dare to say or wouldn't say, or were more civilized and wouldn't talk like that. Well, you know, Hitler got going to those people and he mesmerized them. When we saw movies about Hitler, it'd always be, you know, he's standing up there and he'd be like foaming at the mouth practically. He'd be shouting. And the movies, the clips we got, they were all doctored. They were all like, you know, to make him look bad. And he did. And we were convinced that he was just this madman. But people in Germany said that, well, you might think so, but I mean, if you went to one of his talks and go to the whole thing, you'd be different. Because he'd start out pretty calmly. And he'd work the crowd. He'd kind of calm, and then suddenly he'd kind of raise up the intensity a little bit. Yeah? Huh? Then he started, you know, gradually building on. He was a master speaker. You know, a different ilk than Obama for sure, but you know, still probably equally or more charming. He charmed those people. It was like a big show that he would come to town and they fell under his spell, even though they were civilized and everything else. They fell under the spell of the greater Germany. We must rise up. Let's not allow, you know, the enemy. But the enemy was, of course, the stupid world. They put all this nasty, impossible sanctions and everything on Germany. People were miserable. It was a dumb thing for the world to do, wasn't it? Look at all the trouble it causes. Why hadn't we been a little bit more fair? Well, obviously we weren't fair because we weren't being... The human element wasn't strong in those things. Those conferences and the Versailles Treaty and whatever it was. So yeah, Hitler was kind of a wild guy and a nefarious fellow for sure, a liar to be sure, paranoid. He didn't like something, he get in his way and he burned down the Reichstag where it was, you know, and then he blamed the I mean, it was just a comedy of junk. But they fell for it, or they got frightened of him. And the story is, I don't know if it's true or not, the story is that the more sophisticated Germans, the wealthier class who were kind of behind the scenes in the government and everything, they were having a bit of a time. They thought, well, they could use him to kind of get some power that they wanted for some reason or another to do something or whatever they were looking to do. But he outpowered them. He got the power. It's so terrifying. The thing's awful, unbelievable. You don't even want to. You can't speak about the horror that he promulgated on the earth. Absolutely disgusting, unspeakable horror and terror. And they all went along with it. Most of them, not all of them. There are wonderful stories that have emerged about people who didn't go along. I'm sure you've heard some of those stories. But anyway, just the horror. Well, now why was I talking about that? Talking about Hitler. Anyway, the war had just started. And my father, right away, volunteered for the army. Dropped out of school. I think he was a sophomore. Or maybe he was a junior, I'm not sure. And they took him off here, training off there. And he wrote a story about it. We have it. We've got to get it published. It's a great story, told from the point of view of a young farm boy and what he saw, and his kind of unsophisticated, not all politically astute, but perceptive. What he saw was going on around him, and how they trained people. Well, he'd been a college student, so they made him an officer. It was the reserve officer corps. He wasn't a regular army officer. He was a reserve officer. But it was, I guess, during the heat of the war, it was tantamount to the same thing. So he was like an officer. And so they trained him for months and months and months, and they went all kind of places. And he wrote about it in his story. It's about 7 minutes. We have to get it published. It's a great story. The guys in his platoon, the people in the barracks, and all the different kinds of the captains and the different stories. Some bizarre things you don't usually hear in a sanitized history books. Interesting stuff. Anyway, but here's the funny thing. They trained them, and they trained them, and they trained them. These people had never seen a moment of combat, not a drop. I guess they trained them under live fire and stuff like that, and that was good. Anyway, they kept training them, and then they got them all ready finally. And then, somewhere around June of, so it must have been December or something. I'm not sure exactly the dates, 1943. We were at one camp and another. Those were right in the middle of all that. September 1942, September 16th. So my father, in the meantime, was in an artillery battalion. He was very good at math. He was smart at math. Calculated things really quickly. He always had a slide rule, and I was always had a slide rule, and he'd show me things. Oh yeah, I do this on the slide rule. Blah, blah, blah. Quite the math guy. But other than that, a regular guy. Wasn't an intellectual at all. So more of a regular. They say he could get along with anybody. He got along with most everybody, and had a lot of, he knew a lot of people and stuff. Anyway, my point is, they took these kids that had no combat experience, and they shipped them over to England, where they were there for a fairly short time, I think, a few months maybe. And then D-Day came, June whatever, 1944, I think it was. And Eisenhower got to them on those boats. They're coming into this shore. It has a lot of, as you, I'm sure, have all heard, it has a lot of German, bunkers, and I mean they had hardened the shore. They had all kind of guns and artillery there, even though they were kind of screwed up and weren't expecting them to come there. Because, as you know, I mean I don't know. I don't want to go off into that story about why the Germans kept thinking it was going to be up north. But anyway, so there they are. They're coming in on this shore. You got a picture in those LST boats, those open boats. They come in, they get to the shore. The front end comes down. It's absolutely exposed. They all go rushing out to the shore and look for cover. And they've never been in any battles of any kind. They're all green. Well, maybe not all of them, just 99. They were newly trained soldiers, and they put them right into the heat of the battle. I never understand that. Why didn't they have more seasoned troops that would take the point? I don't know. Anyway, a lot of them just hardly got out of the boats and they were dead. But my dad got lucky because our God was looking after him, is actually the case. I'm sure, because there was a couple, Omaha Beach, that was the most notorious. But there were other beaches down the way. And they had gotten off, they had drifted off or something, they had gotten away from the main, couldn't make the main beach. Or there was some kind of issue. The fire was too heavy or something, so they went down to the next beach, I think it was the third beach down. There was hardly any fire, so they landed and managed to, pretty much intact. Get off into the French countryside, and then he tells a big story about that. That was very intense. Germans all over the place, hedgerows, trees, villages, people in the villages, paratroopers landing, all kind of drama and excitement, and terrible things happening, of course. Yeah. But Dad was lucky. He said, God was looking after him, because one time he said a mortar thing should have landed right at his feet, but it didn't go off. And there was a couple of other instances of that kind of thing. But he was an artillery observer. So him and he had a guy with him that would carry the radio and one thing and another, and on a backpack, and they would get up into the tree. They would, because the Germans would have artillery somewhere, and they'd be lobbing shells at the Americans, and causing a lot of death and destruction. So my dad's job was to get up in the tree, or get up in some place where they could see where the fire was coming from. And he was very good at the math. He was very good at it. So he was a forward observer. They had a lifespan, I think at the time somebody said 45 minutes. He was out there for months, weeks and months at a time. And he would radio in and say, okay, well, da-da-da, and they're at sector 1421.2, and he'd give all these things. And it would direct our artillery fire, and then we'd go boom, 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 and blow them out of the water, so to speak. So that was his job. He was also, I think he was a lieutenant at the time, and had a few men under him that came and went. And they had to carry, he was telling, they had to carry like these 60 pounds. They're running around like guerrilla warfare on the shrubs, these little rows, and they're getting behind there, hiding, looking for. And they got on these 60-pound, huge amounts of equipment. That's the Army for you. Just unbelievable. Oh my God, what a trip that was. What a story he tells. But anyway, so this one particular day, there was a particularly notorious German thing, and they had gotten up in the tree so they could get the exact azimuth, the exact coordinates of that German thing. Germans were no slouches, you know. They weren't anybody you want to fool around with, and they had spotted him way off in the distance. They spotted him climbing up that tree with his buddy. They said the mortars over there, the shells coming. And well, they heard him coming, so they scampered down the tree. And as they were scampering down the tree, my father felt something slice his left arm. Sliced it. Didn't go through the bone, but I mean, it sliced his arm pretty good. And well, it was so that he didn't even think of it, you know. Didn't feel anything, pain. And he kind of fell out of the tree. There was such a rush to get out of the tree. When he got down on the ground, there he was, he was lying there, and he couldn't move his arm, and there's a big pool of blood there. Oh, they hit him. They hit him pretty good. So, his buddy got, you know, they got the, you know, the medical corps or something, and got up there and put him on a stretcher. And took him out. But the thing, you know, as often happens, the thing, they didn't treat it soon enough, and they didn't clean it well enough, and it got infected, and it got pretty serious. And so they had to put him on a hospital ship, and they sent him back to the United States. Well, so that was the end of the war. He was there for a few weeks. And on D-Day, he landed on D-Day. And then he was, but then after a while he was on the hospital ship coming home. He was a young kid. It's funny how kids are. He was mostly interested in the food. He was always talking his stories. Oh yeah, and then we had this and this, and this was really good for dinner. And then we had this and this, and they gave us this kind of food. And that guy was always focused on the food. Pretty good. Maybe it was his French ancestry, I don't know. He was a very, you know, I mean, do I look French? He didn't really look, he didn't act like a French person. He didn't have a French accent or some kind of floppy-doppy thing. He was a man, 6 foot something, pretty good sized guy. How many kids did he have? 1, 2, 3. 2 boys and a girl. Terrific family, man. Oh my God. Didn't have much luck with marrying the right person. My mother was a piece of work, for sure. And, you know, she had lots of good qualities, but also a piece of work. Very principled. He was more of an easygoing kind of a guy. French people kind of natural, easygoing. They know how to live. Anyway, so he wrote that story, and then, but you know, so there he was. He never went back to the war. He was too disabled. But the good thing was that it didn't break the bone. It kind of malformed his arm just a little bit. So instead of being like from his shoulder to his elbow being straight, it was just, you know, come down just a little curve, not much. You could hardly know. Yeah, when he was dressed up, you couldn't even notice it. You'd have to be around for one to say, oh yeah, his shoulders a little bit or something. Hardly noticeable. And he was very good at calculating things, so he ended up being teaching students at they had a big place there in Fort Bliss, Texas. It's just just right by El Paso. They also have a big air base there, Biggs Air Force Base. I don't even know if it's still there. But I mean, I know Fort Bliss is. Big Army outfit. And they used to have these big kind of trailer, they're like truck trailers. But they have whoa, 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 the radar going when those anti-missile things came out, Nike anti-missile missiles. People had to be trained how to fire those, how to aim those things and fire them and everything else. And he was the one he taught them, so he had a good job. So, you know, as a result, after the war, he did go to Korea for a while. Then he went to Japan. He was over there when MacArthur was doing the MacArthur plan in Japan. He was some interesting places. But by that time he was more administrative. He wasn't seeing combat. He wasn't in combat. I don't know because if it's wound or what the story was. Anyway, he spent his life as an army officer. Eventually started editing the paper. We kept saying, well, when are you going to retire, Dad? When are you going to retire? And he said, well, you know, pretty soon. I'll retire pretty soon. And he went on and on. But then eventually, he did retire, but he retired, got his retirement pay, but then he went back to the same job he had, exactly the same job. He was the editor of the certain section of the Army, had a bunch of buildings there, and they were doing all this Nike's, this type of stuff. And he had become the editor of the paper because he's educated, you know, edit things well and stuff. So he retired, but he came back with the same job, so they had double salary. So he was living pretty good. It didn't take much to live good in those days. He was a middle-class guy. He was never wealthy, but you know, he had a nice car and one of those tract homes with the big backyards, you know, a single-story, kind of a nice house with a pretty good-sized bunch of bedrooms and a good-sized living room and, you know, a nice walkway and patio and all that kind of stuff. So that's how our branch of the French people got did I put my right glasses on? You know, I didn't. I'm not surprised. What did I do with them? Oh my goodness. Well, I don't see them here, so I'll just have to keep wearing these. These are the wrong glasses and strain my eyes. But anyway, yeah, so another 15 minutes of this. So that's where I came in. An army brat. But there's more to this story. Anyway, I think that's about enough for now. Adventures of my dad in the army. And I think when he came back, my grandparents had a farm in Bonita, Oklahoma, 160 acres. Grandpa had a bunch of cows up there, milking cows, maybe 20 or 30, I don't know, 20, 30. And he'd milk those cows every day, and that's how they made their living, a dairy farm. Interesting farm. I'll tell you more about the farm in maybe the next chapter. Okay, so there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my stories, and I look forward to seeing you the next time. Okay, bye-bye.